Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Welcome to Story by Story, sharing the human experience. I'm your host, Kate Dudding, and today we have as our guest host, Marni Gillard, a storyteller and author from Schenectady. Welcome, Marni.
Thanks, Kate. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. That Joe is off on vacation. You know, life does go on, but the show must go on too. And so he suggested, why not have a guest co-host? And I thought Marni would fit the bill.
Well, it's a treat.
Okay. September is I always think of it as a new year sort of feel about it. I guess that's
Always.
left over from the school
Always.
year. So I'm looking forward to the fall and our new season of a Story Circle at Proctor's and Story Sundays at the Glen Sanders Mansion. But we'll get into that later. But what I'd like to share with you is that our guest today is a friend of mine, Dan Berggren, a singer-songwriter from the Adirondacks, from Western New York, and now from Ballston Spa.
Right.
Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Kate. Hi, Marni.
Yeah, good to have you, Dan.
Yes. And Dan is a little bit of a change for us, but his songs all have stories in them. So, and he's going to be performing at Story Sunday in September with Janine Laverty. So that's why he's a very good fit for this show. And in fact, Janine Laverty had him as a guest at one of her weekend workshops. A number of years ago.
I think in the 80s.
Oh, well, no, that wasn't me then. No, it had to be from 95 on, and it was at Racket Lake. And we were meeting in the chapel. And I remember it was stories about history. And so I had a story, and then Dan came on the scene and said, and now we're going to write a song. I went, I'm here to write a story, not a song. And he wants me to do it now. But I don't know if you recall, but I did express my dismay to a certain degree. But, I came up with something, so I was quite pleased. So clearly you have taken me over, though I don't write many songs. But one of your songs that I have many favorite songs, but one of my favorite songs is a story you were commissioned to write. Could you tell us how that came about?
I'll bet you mean Alice.
Yes, that's the song.
When I was a kid, didn't have a great interest in history, but it was through my mother telling me family stories and then learning local history from the Minerva Historical Society that I got interested in stories and people, events in the Adirondacks, and that just kept getting bigger, that sphere of interest. And the Minerva Historical Society used to ask me if I would write a song about one topic or another. Mm-hmm. They have a museum where each year they change the theme, and people can bring in related items to that theme, and then they don't have to give them up forever. They can take them home at the end of the year. One year it was old-time doctors in medicine, and they asked if I would write a song about that. One time they were dedicating part of the museum to a wonderful woman from the community who had passed on, Alice Schwitzer, and asked if I would write a song about Alice. Well, if anyone knew Alice, they knew the song had to be about singing, because when she retired, she started a community chorus. There were no auditions. Anybody could join. There were people from 18 to 80 in the group. My parents were in it. It was during my college years, so I got to sing with the group during vacations. And, you know, for a lot of people, the last time they sang with others was high school chorus, with the exception of maybe singing hymns in church. So it was easy to start. I had a topic and I had a deadline, and those are the two things that, like if I said, okay, Kate, we've got 45 minutes to write a song, and your topic is, those two things, having an idea and a deadline, you squeeze a song out, and I've been singing it for years, and it doesn't matter whether people actually knew this person or not, because it's about giving back to your community, and it's about something special that happens when you do make music with others. And that's something that I try to incorporate into all of my concerts right from the very first song, to get people in the audience to not feel like they're separate from me, but that we're all there together for one purpose, and that is to have a good time and to sing.
I saw Dan with the jam crackers.
That's right, jam
Yes.
crackers.
Which is about, that the name comes from, that was loggers who were on the river and when the logs got all jammed up, they got their sticks with the pointy things on the end to unjam them.
Right.
Okay, but I always think it's like jam and crackers.
No.
So that's why I sort of hesitated, because I was, did I get it right? Anyways, I saw Dan with Peggy, Lynn, and Dan Duggan, the Jam Crackers, that's what the trio is called, up at Cafe Lena in August. And you started with Alice, but I was there about 5 years ago when you ended with Alice, and it's a wonderful way. And when you were there, it seemed like everyone in the room, and it was almost a sold-out crowd, was singing. I was in the front, but it seemed like there were a lot of people joining in, that you had a whole room of groupies.
Well, you know, as soon as a few people start singing, that opens the door and makes other people feel like it's okay. Even if I haven't sung in public before, or I don't know the words that well, that's, the chorus comes around again and again.
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
And it was fun to start the concert with that, because as you said, I often end a concert with that. And it certainly got us off on the right foot.
Yes, it's a song with a big heart. Now, Marni is particularly wonderful as a host today, because Marni has sung.
I came from a family that were more singers than storytellers, really. But my grandfather would stand at the piano and say, tell the story, meaning feel the words, really feel what it is you're singing.
Right.
So I love to sing along, and never get enough singing in my life.
And you were part of Sweet Adelines, or?
I was part of a group called the Schenectady Melodiers, and they weren't affiliated with Sweet Adelines, but it was barbershop harmony. And then I was in a quartet called the Pitch Pipers. We had a really good time a number of years ago, and then I found storytelling, and it kind of stole me away.
Yes. So, Dan, would you sing the song, and then we can talk more about it once our listeners are, if some of them don't know the song, then they will know what we were talking about.
And you and Marni and all the folks at home can sing along.
Okay.
Good.
Let me tell you a little story about some friends I know, and a woman who brought the rest of town a gift from long ago. Folks who used to sing for fun, alone or in harmony, had fallen out of the habit, and now we're watching TV. When Alice came into the town, it was a quiet kind of day. Folks went about their business in the usual sort of way. Who'd like to sing in a chorus was her question to everyone. Sopranos, altos, tenors, and bass. Together we'll have some fun. We can still sing along. Whether our voices are weak or they're strong, the spirit of Alice lives on in song, and we will still sing along. Old and young joined Alice. They formed a community choir. They'd rehearse each week and try to reach those notes going higher and higher. After working all day, they'd practice. There was so much fun in the singing. Even when they'd reach the end and Alice said, "Once more from the beginning," we can still sing along. Whether our voices are weak or they're strong, the spirit of Alice lives on in song, and we will still sing along. Well, the music got better and better. When they did a show, they'd all pitch in to make it work, and together they would grow. The town was proud of its chorus and moved by the spirit of song. But the day that Alice passed away, it was hard to sing along. Now folks go about their business in the usual sort of way. But once in a while a tune makes them smile, and they still hear a voice say, "Who'd like to sing in a chorus?" was her question to everyone. Sopranos, altos, tenors, and bass. Together we'll have some fun. Who'd like to sing in a chorus? That's a question to you from me. Sopranos, altos, tenors, and bass. Together in harmony, we can still sing along. Whether our voices are weak or they're strong, the spirit of Alice lives on in song, and we will still sing along. Yes, we will still sing along.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, in my family, we did sing a lot, and we did sing in barbershop harmony because my grandfather owned a restaurant where his kids and their siblings and their in-laws, you know, the wives and husbands, spouses, they all worked in the restaurant and came out and sang for the patrons. They'd just take a break, and they'd be the singing waitresses or bartenders, or my father was the cook. He'd come out in his apron. He sang bass. And I love that
I can see
song.
why people would want to come back and
Oh, yeah, Walsh's Manor, Fulton, New York.
Now, were you part of the choir, or?
Yes, I was.
You were.
On and off through the years. They would put on, at first it was just for the sake of singing, but then they would put on shows at the nursing home in North Creek, or go to Warrensburg for an event and put on shows that were like music reviews, not a full-fledged cabaret, but a series of songs on a theme, and they would put that on at the high school auditorium.
And you, before the show started, you mentioned your parents were part too.
Yes.
Yes.
They loved that. It was, I grew up in a singing family too. My parents, my brother, sister, we all sang. And my mother would often play the piano, or we had a pump organ, and she loved to play hymns. And we'd all harmonize.
Oh, something I've never learned to do, but I was a soprano when in school choruses, and they mostly got the melody. Anyways, I digress. So you were commissioned by the Historical Society in Minerva to write this after Alice's death. And could you tell us a little bit about the process? Because I'm sure it's somewhat similar to a story creating process, except you've got the music to help or to hinder, or to...
That's a good question. Songwriters approach approach it differently. Some come up with the words first and then find a tune. For others, it's finding a tune and then putting words to it. For me, they seem to come together, that the rhythm of the language suggests a melody and a rhythm. Some songs require research. I wrote a song for the Black River Canal Museum in Boonville, and I did some research. And as the more research I did, the more excited I got about condensing the history of this canal from Rome to Boonville to Lyons Falls with 109 locks, more than the entire Erie Canal, because it had to go uphill to Boonville and then downhill from Boonville to Lyons Falls. And everything that entailed, from when Governor Clinton first gave the idea to New Yorkers more canals to feed the Erie Canal and make different parts of New York State grow. All of this research, you can get into the smallest detail if you want to. And then the challenge is, how do you condense it into a story?
Well, and a song is a very short story.
Yes.
Yeah.
The longest might be 4 or 5 minutes, and the typical is 3 minutes. For Alice, I didn't have to do research. It was a matter of remembering, mining my own memory for that song.
There was just a workshop recently with a storyteller from Virginia, Kim Whitecamp, and she suggested, if you're working on a personal story, to tell it in its whatever form it is, with a group of friends, and then not to have them critique it, but for them to ask questions about what more they wanted to find out. And so it was a memory mining exercise that she was suggesting, rather than what more typically is, how to create a story and critiquing and that kind of. This was before that, to help, and Peggy Semino was there, and she remembered a story about a little boy who lived downstairs. She couldn't remember his name, but the next day she had it. So who knows how the mind works, but I think we have a search engine that the older we get, the longer it takes. But you put in a query and it might pop out.
Right.
So that, I'm sure you went through some of that with.
Brainstorming is such a wonderful part of the creative process, and if you can sit with others and begin an idea, begin a story like that, and have people ask questions, that's a wonderful way to brainstorm. If you're sitting alone, my brainstorming consists of taking a piece of paper and starting in the middle. I'll put the general idea, like Alice, right in the center of the piece of paper.
Okay.
And then what does that make me think of? Well, it makes me think of, we rehearsed in the cafeteria at school. Well, when we rehearsed, what were some of the unique things? Well, asking us to do that one more time. Going for, on that piece of paper with the brainstorming, the senses. What did things smell like? What did things look like? And can you pull ideas from that?
Dan, do people ever ask you to help them write a personal story, song, something like that same process, but just somebody saying, I've always wanted to maybe make up a song about this character or something like that. Have you ever? Yes,
that often happens at the conclusion of a concert. Someone will come up to me and say, "Oh, you should hear about my Uncle Joe.
Yeah.
My Uncle Joe was a logger up in so-and-so, and boy, you should write a song about him." And as I talk to them, I give them the support and the idea that, well, maybe you should write a song about them. And if you want to send me rough drafts, shoot me an email and I'll give you some feedback. And I also give songwriting workshops.
You do?
They can be as small as 2 or 3 people, or when I go to Sagamore every Columbus Day weekend, it's over 20 years now we've had Mountain Music Weekend, and people teach hammer dulcimer, lap dulcimer, banjo, guitar, mandolin, and songwriting.
Oh, nice.
And we'll sit around a table and pass ideas and support for one another, and people will try out something that's just in its first stage, or maybe they've been working on it for a year since the last songwriting workshop.
Now, I remember a piece of advice you gave when I was in your mini songwriting workshop as part of Janine's story workshop was, and you got it from Harry Chapin, and I'm a big Tom Chapin fan, so and Harry Chapin also, but it was like, ooh, from Harry Chapin to you to me, it's only, you know, was that the first thing that you come up with when you know a part of a tune, it's probably the heart of the song, the verse. It's probably not the I'm sorry, it's the chorus. It's the chorus.
Yeah.
The verse is, you know, probably
the idea
an intro
that hits
to
you
that.
First.
Yeah, and that's what happened with that song at that workshop. That I got whoomph and go, right, that's it. That's the heart of what I'm trying to say.
It's sort of like a headline in the newspaper that you scan the newspaper, you see a headline, and you know right away if you want to read further or you're going to skip that and move on. And it sums up and gives a hint of what's to come. I was asked to write a song for Sagamore. There was a big barn dedication. They were refurbishing this old barn, and it was historically accurate, and they had New York State support, and they're having a big ribbon cutting ceremony in front of this barn. And I was asked, do you know any songs about barns? And if you don't, could you write one? And that's what I call an Adirondack commission. And I had the topic, and I had a deadline, and the first thing that came to me were the big beams.
I was going to say, and that must be your big beam song.
I wrote a song for the Minerva Historical Society about old-time doctors and medicine, and the first thing that struck me was the house call. That there aren't too many house calls anymore. Right. And so the chorus to that was, "Doctor, doctor, can you make a house call?" And I really felt comfortable with not only the words, but the rhythm of that. "Doctor, doctor, can you make a house call?" And when the song was done, I realized that's the same rhythm of syllables as "extra, extra, read all about it." So things happen subconsciously as you're working on a story or a song.
Yeah.
Now, Ira Gershwin never learned to read or write music. And so when George would most of the time would first come up with the music, and then he'd have to play it over and over again for Ira till he could whistle it and hum it himself. And sometimes Ira would create a throwaway line that would have the rhythm of it.
Yes.
And one of the throwaway lines was, "It ain't necessarily so." And the more that he worked on it, the more he realized that's just what he needed. But
songwriters have been doing that for decades and decades. One of my favorites is Paul McCartney when he was working on Yesterday. His placeholder lyrics was "scrambled eggs, da 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 da, scrambled eggs, da 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 da, scrambled eggs." And when he finally realized that what the melancholy in the tune represented, he came up with the idea of Yesterday instead of
scrambled eggs.
Or Leonard Bernstein. I read an article where his daughter said her dad used to do that because all of West Side Story, he wrote the music, then turned it over to Stephen Sondheim, who put the wonderful lyrics to it. And there's that tune, da 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 da. And she said her dad put in there, "There goes what's his name."
which for an elderly crowd would apply, but in West Side Story not so much. Okay.
So this really struck me, and I read it during the news about Bernie Madoff and the Ponzi scheme that he had pulled off on so many people, and I couldn't resist it. So I put the two together and came up with There's a Ponzi scheme, a get-rich-quickly dream.
Oh.
Give me 5 and I'll make it 10, but you'll never see it again. No how, no way, nowhere. I just couldn't resist.
It's good that we can laugh at things like that down the road a little bit. I'm sure people are still crying about what happened with their money.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so we got off, didn't we? Yes, we've drifted a bit here, but
It's all process.
Yeah. It's all-
Marrying words and tunes,
Yes.
words and melodies.
but songs are such concentrated nuggets, I guess, that we have stories that last 20, 30, more than that. And Marni has an opus, a magnum opus about Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen. And that was done with musical interludes, 6 episodes from her life, and each of them 10, 12, 15 minutes, something like that.
It started out with 3 sections of Story Sunday. That's the way it started out. So I just had to find sections, again, like you say, these limits that help us shape something. But then we found a musician who was doing an entire suite of music all about this woman. So we took the music and wove stories to go with the pieces of music, and that's what we came up with the whole show.
But the little, I'll have to, I've recently been trying to take some of my bigger stories, and now that the creation process is over and I've set it aside for a while, I can go back and prune strongly to see if I can get to the heart. And so I did take it was a 40-minute story, and then I took out 2 sections as separate stories altogether. And then it was about Betty Friedan and how after she published her book, The Feminine Mystique, her husband started beating her up. And she stayed with him for 6 years because she needed him to go places. And a Smith graduate, doesn't get divorced, and she didn't know anyone who was divorced. And so when I was reading her memoir, that is really what struck me, was that she could fight for women, and I personally profited from that. But she had a hard time learning to fight for herself. And it was during that formative time period that this was what was going on in her life.
During the creative process, it is a real challenge. The balance between too much detail and not enough detail. You want the listener to take the story on as their own and see their own situations, their own relatives, put it in their own context. But if it's too bare bones, and there aren't enough hooks to grab the imagination. And every song and every story is different. Some have more detail, some have less. I don't describe what Alice is like. I don't use her last name in the song because I hope that people in their community know a person like this who maybe didn't start a community chorus but started something else, that it's about a community leader.
But just that one phrase of hers that you put in, once more from the beginning, to me, that gives a lot of insight into her and even her relationship to the choir, that she wanted to produce a good product. Product isn't right, she artistic creation,
Right.
and so she wanted people to work at it, but the way you phrased it to me, it wasn't, all right, people, once more from the beginning. That wasn't what I got. It was, okay, let's do it once more from the beginning, and we can improve.
Right.
So I got all that from that one phrase. Was I right about?
Yeah, right on the money. Yeah.
Okay. So that was because the wording was just perfect. And I didn't really care if she was tall, short, fat, purple, whatever. that wasn't, it was her spirit, the spirit of Alice is what I was interested in. She was a person who made a difference, and that's a big theme in the stories that I create.
Right.
So we're about halfway through our show, and please ignore this. Marni, how long is your story?
Probably about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Just wanted to leave enough room for that. Should have done that ahead of time, but didn't. Okay, Dan, you had another song you wanted to share with us.
Sure.
Why don't you tell us about it? You can either just do it or tell us a little bit and then sing it however you want.
I wrote this song because I don't know how to knit. Now, I know you do.
Yes.
You knit. And I learned a lot of things from my mother, from ironing and cooking to, well, I certainly didn't learn them from my dad, the household chores, but I never learned how to knit. So when the woman who made me this sweater in 1970, who later became my wife, I wanted to give her a gift in return. And it was quite a few years later that I wrote the song. And ever since I've been singing it, people have been telling me stories about handmade gifts that have been given to them. And we all know how much they mean because of that extra ingredient that goes into something handmade or homemade. And one of the stories, I sang this for some friends in Fredonia, and the first time they heard it, my friend Dick Gilman said, I had a sweater. I went to Dartmouth, and I had my Dartmouth green sweater, and it was my favorite. I wore it all the time, and eventually, he was a geologist. He would wear it in the woods, and it got caught on this branch and caught on that branch, holes, and so he'd tuck the loose threads in, and eventually it got so bad that his wife said, please don't wear that in public anymore. Let's keep it for camping. And, well, years later, he said this was really tough for a New Hampshire boy who holds on to things very tightly. He took it out to the garbage and tossed it in the garbage can and said goodbye to it. Well, unbeknownst to him, his daughter saw him do this, who was 13 or 14 at the time. She retrieved it. She mended the holes, she put leather patches on the elbows, and that was his Father's Day gift the following spring. So many stories like that, but here's the story of my sweater. Somebody made this old sweater from 6 or 7 big green balls of yarn. Look how it surrounds me, and how it wraps around me, just like being hugged by loving arms. I don't know the name of the farmer. I don't suppose that I ever will. No, I never met him, but I can't forget him. He's the one who raised the sheep and sheared the wool. You know I love my old green sweater. I've worn it for years and it feels good as new. There's just one thing that warms me better, that's your love, that's you. Somebody made this old sweater. You can tell that it wasn't by machine, 'cause every stitch of every row was knitted nice and slow from some wool that was dyed so dark and green. Who took time to clean the fleece and then to card it? I don't suppose that I'll ever know. And who did all the spinning? That was only the beginning, before love was knitted into every row. You know I love my old green sweater. I've worn it for years and it feels good as new. There's just one thing that warms me better, that's your love, that's you. Some folks have drawers just jammed with sweaters, while other folks have none to keep them warm. Well, I have one that's got your touch, and that's why it means so much. And I'll wear it when it's mended or it's torn. Somebody made this old sweater from 6 or 7 big green balls of yarn. Look how it surrounds me, and how it wraps around me, just like being hugged by loving arms. You know I love my old green sweater. I've worn it for years and it feels good as new. There's just one thing that warms me better, that's your love. That's you. That's the love that made the sweater. That's you.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Yes. I have the last sweater that my mother knit for me, and I've created it into a story, and then I've taken some literary license and had it worn out, and I've morphed my mother knitting for me, and then her teaching me how to knit, and me knitting, to the tailor story, where he makes a coat and then a jacket, and as it gets worn out, he keeps on cutting it down. And so I fictitiously take my mother's sweater and take the sleeves off and use the yarn from that to mend the body into a vest and a scarf and then a Christmas ornament. So knitters are wonderful people. Sorry.
I learned a wonderful lesson from Janine Laverty about it doesn't matter if it happened, is it true?
Oh, yeah.
That you find truth in fiction.
Yes, let's see. Storytellers never let truth stand in the way of a good
Facts.
story.
Facts.
Yes. I think of it as the heart of the story is true. And now it's, whenever I see this Christmas ornament, which I just fabricated out of thin air, I think of my mother.
Yeah.
And I made enough to give to her sisters, and one of them said that when she leaves it up all the time, hanging from a doorknob, and that whenever she thinks of it, she thinks of my mother. So
There's a story in every treasure we have.
Right.
Yeah.
yes. And so, what did your wife say when she did you hide this song
The song?
creation from her, or do you
No,
remember?
she's always been my first and best critic. She hears things as I'm working on them, and it's very helpful to be able to trust feedback and not have someone say, "Oh, that's very pretty, that's very nice," but I didn't understand what was going on in the second verse. That was unclear, or what was that word you said here? Things like that are invaluable. We all need honest
Yes. Yes.
critics.
Yes, I have a story buddy, and Gert Johnson, and she will often say, "This part was confusing," or "Gee, I wondered more," So, or Michael Parent, who's a storyteller from Maine, said, an easy, non-threatening way to get critique from somebody is just to have them answer 2 questions. What did you want to hear more of? What did you want to hear less of?
Oh, I like that. Very good.
So that's, but yes, having a story buddy is, I guess, a song buddy, excuse me.
I'm going to write that down.
Michael Parent, just the normal spellings. So, let's go to the coming attractions.
Okay.
And then we can have Marnie's story, and then we can finish up by, we'll find wonderful things to talk about. Okay. As I said, the Story Sundays is starting up again in September. We're starting our 13th season at the Glen Sanders Mansion. Next season, we will have our 100th performance at the Glen Sanders Mansion.
Congratulations.
Yes, but not this season. We're in the 90-something or others. And starting us off is Dan with Janine Laverty, whom you've heard us mention, on September 18th at 5 o'clock. And their title is Words, Naked and Clothed. In green sweaters?
Probably make an appearance.
Yes, or clothed with song. Yes. So you can see on the screen a number to call if you want to make a reservation, and our website, story-circle.org. Then we have Dan's coming attractions. On September 2nd, if you're seeing this early enough, he will be at the Coffee Planet in Ballston Spa, starting at 6 o'clock. 2 days later, on September 4th, he'll be at the Fabulous Folk Fest. Now, those people were awfully shy when they named their event. The Fabulous Folk Fest in Bolton Landing. And then, as Dan mentioned, the Mountain Music Weekend at Sagamore, Columbus Day weekend, that's October 7th through 10th. So if there are any budding songwriters or people who want to learn more about music and have only been humming along and want to learn to play some instruments, that's the place for them to go.
You'll have to get on the waiting list for next year.
For next year?
Yeah.
Oh, I bet you have people who come back year after year.
Yes.
Yeah. So then we have Marni's coming attractions. Marni, do you want to say something? I'm sorry, you don't have your glasses. You just asked if you didn't. Okay, on September 14th, you'll be facilitating at the Tri-Cities Interfaith Story Circle, sharing stories from our culture and/or faith roots. So why don't you tell us, and that's at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Albany, next to the Governor's Mansion, between the Governor's Mansion and the New York State Museum. So why don't you tell us a little about that?
Well, the Interfaith Story Circle of the Capital Region meets from September through the spring once a month, and we move from place to place, so we have different houses of worship and different themes. And we thought it'd be lovely to invite people to come to the newly renovated Catholic Cathedral. It's really quite beautiful inside. And I volunteered to be the starter-upper of the year, and I love to talk about heritage and culture because I think culture, some people think of it so strictly in terms of your ethnic upbringing, and in America we have people with all kinds of mixture in ethnicity, but we have a neighborhood culture, we have a school culture, all kinds of ways that we can look at heritage and culture. And I love
a knitting culture.
A knitting culture, yes. Absolutely, a songwriting culture.
Yeah, a singing.
So so it should be fun. I tell for about a half an hour, and then we open it up, and anybody can tell, and you can really tell right off the cuff. It doesn't have to be a rehearsed story, but it can be. Mm-hmm. And it could be a folk tale that somehow comes out of your tradition, or just a life story, a memory of grandma's spaghetti sauce. It's so great, and what would happen in your family.
So that's September 14th, 7 to 9, the Catholic Cathedral in Albany. And then on the 17th, you will be holding an all-day workshop in Glenmont, reconnecting the wild writer within. Now, I know about the child within, but the wild writer?
Well, just as Dan's been talking about the composing of stories, I think there's a creative part of all of us, and writing is one way to get it out. And we do exercises for bringing up stories, and then we share with each other, and sometimes people will bring writing they're working on. But it's for any writers at all, at any level, and we have a wonderful day of it from 8:30 to 4. We spend the day together, and it's at the home of Amy Musiker in Glenmont, New York, which I believe if you check my website, we might be able to have directions on the website.
Yes.
To Amy's, or at least a
yes,
phone
there
number
are.
of how to get them.
No, there are directions.
Okay.
I'm Marni's webmaster, so I believe you gave it to me, and
Okay,
I
that's
plopped
good.
it in there. Yes. So MarniGillard.com and BerggrenFolk.com are our two guest websites. And then for the final performance of the 19th annual Not Just for Kids Storytelling Series over in Fort Hunter, which there's Schenectady, and then west of Schenectady is Amsterdam, and west of Amsterdam is Fort Hunter. a wonderful series that's been going on for obviously 19 years. Jo Radner from Maine will be telling on September 11th at 6 p.m. at the Visitors Center. And her topic is Pioneers, Inventors, and Ordinary Folks, Stories of Yankee Ingenuity. And I know Jo, and she's a wonderful storyteller. You probably won't get to see her do her moose face, but she does a wonderful moose face that she transforms her very lovely face into something very moose-like. Anyways, I digress. If you want to watch more stories, you can see the stories that I've cut out of these shows by going to our website, storycircle@proctors.org, and clicking on YouTube. We now have over 5 hours of stories, almost 20 different tellers, about 30 different stories. So come, if your friends go, what is storytelling? Please point them in this direction and they'll find out. And if you care to help, you can become a patron of Story Circle at Proctor's. You can go to our website and click on how you can help, or the actual whole website is listed there. And we greatly appreciate any contributions you make. They are fully tax deductible and matching funds also. So that was the coming attractions. Now, Marni, you've prepared a story to share with us today.
I have, and I love the way little synchronicities happen. The way you were talking about making a song for a person, or knitting a gift of a sweater. My mother was not a knitter, but she was a piano player, and that was her gift to all of us. But the other thing she did for me was that she read me stories. And so this story is way down deep inside, and I love to tell it every summer because it's really a story for the summer and a story about me and my mother in its own little folktale way. A little girl lived with her mother in a cottage deep in the wooded area, kind of right on the edge of when the forest got so dark. And it was a summertime. It was a hot, muggy, sticky kind of summer. And one night, that little girl heard her mother tossing and turning and tossing and turning. And she got in her mind, I'm going to bring my mother a drink of water. So in her nightdress, she went out the front door and through the yard to the great big well right there in the yard by the cottage. And she lowered the bucket down into the well, but it didn't splash, it just kind of went thud. And she knew deep inside, our well has gone dry. So she pulled up the bucket and set it aside, but she really wanted to bring her mother a drink. And then she remembered how in the woods, she would play with her friends, and they would go deep into the woods in the daytime, and they could take their dippers and have a nice drink from the cool spring that was always there. It never dried up. Her mother said it came from way up in the mountains and also from deep in the earth, and you could count on that spring. But of course it was night, so it took all her courage to take down that old tin dipper that was gray and kind of rusty and face the path and begin to walk into the woods. And it was so dark. Oh, the branches were pulling at her dress and she could feel sticks and stones that she was stepping on, but she just kept going. And pretty soon, it's like she could smell the spring and almost feel the coolness on her face. And then there it was right before her. She bent over and filled her dipper, and of course she was thirsty herself, so she took a great big splashy drink of the water and it dribbled down her cheeks and her dress. She sighed. She was excited to bring that drink home. So she filled the dipper again right to the brim, and then she turned and started back on the path. And she hadn't walked too long when she heard the sound of an animal. Would it be a wolf maybe coming after her? And then in the distance she could just see the eyes first of, it's just an old dog that she knew from the town. All the kids would pat his head and she felt safe, and the dog came up and was really thirsty, she could tell. So she put a little water in her hand and put it for him to lick. You could lick along with me if you want. Oh, he was happy. He wagged his tail, and because he picked up the scent of the water, then he went down the path and found more at the spring. Oh, she felt good. She had a story to tell her mother now, and she kept along the path, which didn't seem so dark anymore. And then she looked at her dipper. Why, that old gray tin dipper had turned to a sparkling silver. And there was a light coming off the dipper, and it lit the path. Oh, now she really had a story to tell. And down the path she went until she heard another sound. She looked into the woods. Who was that? It sounded like a human voice. Sure, there was the old man who was always talking to the children in the town. He'd pinch their cheeks sometimes and give them advice or tell them they were a cute little one. She liked him. And when she saw him coming closer, he said, "Oh, you got some water? Could I be having a drink?" She said, "Sure, it's for my mother, but sure, have a little bit, and then you can go back to the spring." And that's just what he did, taking a nice sip of the water and, giving her a little pinch on the cheek and a thank you. And she went down the path again, ready to get home and give the rest of the water to her mother. But again, when she looked, it seemed like the woods was going brighter. Maybe the sun was almost coming up, but no, the sky still seemed dark with all the trees around her. So she kept walking and walking, and soon she came right back into the clearing of her own house and went quickly up the steps and into the room where her mother was sleeping. Oh, her mother was deeply asleep now, but she had the water, so, Mother, wake up. I brought you a little drink of water." And the mother, who had been so deeply asleep, was a little startled to see her daughter there at her bedside, and all right, she took the dipper and began to drink it, not noticing that it had changed. And then, when she looked at the dipper, it wasn't that old tin dipper or the sparkling silver dipper, or the gold that had now turned since she gave the drink to the man, but it was diamonds. Diamonds all strung together in the shape of the dipper. The mother was so shocked, she kind of went, "Ah!" And the dipper lifted up, and it didn't fall back into her hands. It kind of drifted just across that room and out the window. And the mother, so surprised, looked at her little girl, and they held their hands and went to the window and looked out, and the dipper was rising up and up into the sky. And they just stood and looked at that beautiful constellation of stars. And you know, every summer, and even in wintertime, although you have to look at a different place in the sky, you can see that dipper. Maybe find somebody to go outside and look up at that dipper of stars. Oh, all over the world they tell stories about those stars and how they came to be. This is just one story. But when you see that dipper, see if you can remember this story of that brave child who, to do something nice, something friendly, something kind, went into the deep, dark woods and found that ever-bubbling spring of water. And that's a story my mother used to tell me night after night. Tell it again, Mom. Tell it again.
Did she tell you where it came from?
It came from an old fairy tale book. Actually, we had the book, and we would share it. It's a book that Platt and Monk, which is a now defunct publisher, but was very famous when I was a child. It had been printed, I think, in the 30s and then reprinted in the 50s, and that was the book that I was given. It was almost like one of the earliest big books. It was quite a big book with beautiful pictures, and called The Road in Storyland. It's not an easy book to find now, but the Platten Monk, they had one of their staff writers, who I found this out many years later, and they gave that staff writer the name Watty Piper. And we all know Watty Piper, if you're a reader of children's books, for The Little Engine That Could. But it really was just a staff writer, and they passed that name down for a long, long time. It wasn't any particular person named Watty Piper. But
the spirit of Watty Piper.
Absolutely, the spirit of Watty Piper. And it's an old folktale. That book is full of old European, mostly European folktales. And written down. And in those days, nobody was giving sources at the end of the book of where they had found the story. But it's a story you can find as a folktale.
It was. I loved, Little Girl in the Woods. Ooh, are we Little Red Riding Hood? Are we Goldilocks? and then the kindnesses, and the good. And she didn't even think twice about being kind, and then the object changing, and then. But you had me going there. I wasn't anticipating that ending.
Yeah, so it's a how and why story, really, of how that Star Dipper came into the sky.
Yes.
Poor Qua tale.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for repetition. If you hadn't heard that story over and over, or all the stories we grew up with, or songs, it's that repetition that allows us to sing them or tell them today.
That's right. That story kept alive in me. I'd forgotten many of the stories. I stopped reading that book probably when I was 9 or 10 and moved on to different kinds of books. But my mother took it to her school. She was a school teacher. And when she retired from teaching, by then I was a school teacher. And I went through her boxes and boxes of all the things she'd collected over the years. And when I saw that book, just even seeing a little boy and a girl skipping along a path on the cover, the hair stood right up on my arms. And I was already storytelling just a little bit, but going to the library and looking for stories. Janine was my first teacher, Janine Laverty. And when I opened that book, it was like, I have a whole series of stories already inside me. I don't have to learn them. I do have to learn how to get them out my mouth, but it was quite an experience to find that book. Yeah, it's been a treasure.
Wow. Now, some of you may have treasures like that, and going through, cleaning a closet may seem, which is what I've been doing this year. I think I just finished my 3rd closet, but I'm finding things. Yesterday, I found some embroidered doilies and linen towels that my grandmother embroidered, and so I'm thinking, I can put. Well, that one's maybe I'll get a piece of glass to put on top of the table and protect it, but so we can see it. So
and seeds of a story.
Oh yes. So I'd like to thank our guest, Dan Berggren from BerggrenFolk.com, B-E-R-G, then a second G, R-E-N,
right.
folk.com, and Marni Gillard, our guest host, MarniGillard.com, for joining us in Story by Story, sharing the human experience. And I'd like to thank you for joining us too, and I hope you'll find us again and join us in the months to come. Thank you very much.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round.